The US, on its current trajectory, is heading for bankruptcy. For the last 15 or 20 years, we've had rich and to a certain extent now poor countries like China actually funding the world's richest country, the United States. We've had a kind of managed anarchy. There hasn't really been a financial system in the sense of something with levers or anyone in control really since the early 1970s. The US gave up trying to run the system. It's deeply discouraging the way the US political system is currently working. My best guess is the euro will not survive in its current form. It's fundamentally a political project, but it's probably doomed. I'm fairly sure that the Americans understand that the reason that the Chinese will not anytime soon allow a sharp revaluation of their currency is because they're concerned that that would put tens of millions of people out of work almost overnight. The third quarter of this year, China's reserves were growing at approximately $1.5 million a minute. At one level, it's simple arithmetic. If one group of countries are running a persistent surplus, someone else must run a deficit. And this is where we have the sort of dialogue of the deaf that's been going on in the last few years, but particularly the last month or so. If everybody tried to behave the way the Germans did, we would have a global economic slump. It's impossible for everybody to have a surplus. But this dialogue of the deaf really is a serious problem. The financial world that we're in would be difficult enough if we simply had opposed interests, and to some extent we do. Countries do have different interests. But perhaps what's more worrying is a lack of shared understanding or shared view about what's actually causing the imbalances and what needs to be done. Now, there are a couple of areas of moderate optimism. The IMF is possibly the only forum, really, where we might see some scope for putting something together that would resemble a new financial system that might contribute to both monitoring and influencing government policies, although I don't hold out a great deal of hope for that, but also perhaps putting in place some kind of system to allow the world to gradually stop relying on the dollar. Do we try and have a new currency or some kind of replacement for the dollar? Having a single currency, or having a currency which everyone agrees is the world currency, backed by an economy and a country with the strength and will to enforce it, does have common benefits. We're now in possibly an unprecedented period. There is no global hegemon, as the international relations people call it. The US is no longer dominant. In military terms, yes, it's still way ahead of any other country and will be for quite some time. But in terms of economic dominance, it's merely a very large player. But there is no dominant player to replace it. China's going to be the world's biggest economy probably quite quickly at this rate, but it will not have the dominance that the US had at the end of the Second World War. So where can we look for hope? Well, there is one very fundamental common interest in all of this, which is to preserve world trade, and that hopefully is what's going to stop things getting out of control. So exactly how things are going to work out in the next few years, I think, is extremely unclear, but the one advantage that decision makers have today in the US and China in particular is that they know what happened last time. They have two historical episodes that they can look back to and learn from. Thank you very much. I hope that was of interest.